All right, today the topic of the presentation is called Check Yourself Before You Wreck Yourself. Fool. All right? Write the title of the presentation down. You have about a few minutes. Yes? Oh, well, it's a phrase called check yourself before you wreck yourself. It will all make sense at the end of it. All right. All right, everybody, you guys know the routine. Read the red. Ready? 1, 2, 3. I can.
Describe
How the
Constitution
limits the powers of government through.
separates power,
And.
checks and balances.
All right. As I explain it, I want you guys to write it down. All right. So we understand I can describe how the Constitution limits the powers of government. So that off the rip lets you know that government is what?
Not all power. It limits
You,
power.
you said it, boy, and good job, Alyssa. The Constitution limits the powers of government. And as Saeed said, the government is not all powerful. Saeed, explain what that means.
They don't have full control over everything. There's somebody higher up who controls how much power they have.
Good job, good job. And what are the two principles that we're going to break down? So separation of powers and checks and balances. I'll give you another minute to just write this down. All right, moving on. Don't worry about it. So, like we just described, limited government. The government is not all powerful. It doesn't have all the power. Was it always like this?
No.
No. We had what we call an absolute what? Absolute government or an absolute monarchy. And in an absolute monarchy, if the king saw Saeed's wife, let's say, right? And I like how your wife looks, and I'm the king. Saeed, bring your wife over here. She mine now. Bye. Deuces. Get out of my face. Done. I could do whatever I wanted to do. If Angel had some nice land, I said, Angel, I like that piece of land you got. It's mine now. Get off. You stepping on my grass. Bam, I just took Angel's land. That's an absolute monarchy. But an absolute monarchy basically means the government can do absolutely whatever they wanted to do. That's changed. Because a limited government is the idea that the government can only do what, who? We, the people, allow it to do. That phrase, we the people, is found in what document? The Constitution. It starts off, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. So that lets you know that the people establish the government. The people establish the government. And in this Constitution, they limit what the government can and cannot do. They call the Constitution the supreme law of the land. We spoke about the taco supreme in here. Now, what's a taco supreme?
A real big taco.
A real big taco. Are there other tacos at Taco Bell?
Yeah.
Do they? What's in a taco supreme?
Beef,
lettuce,
All right. I know y'all poor, so what's in a regular taco? I know y'all know that.
beef cheese.
Sour cream in that?
No.
Ah. So in a taco supreme, that is the top. What?
Taco.
That's the top taco. So when we talk about the Constitution being the supreme law of the land, we're saying out of all the laws that they make, the Constitution is the what? Top law. Yes.
But the supreme taco usually costs more than the normal one.
Yeah, that's true because it has more things. Good. Our Constitution does what with our government? It organizes it and it separates it. All right. So, moving along. The first constitutional principle we're going to talk about is called separation of powers. What's a principle? The leader of a school? No, not that principle. It's like a rule. So the constitutional rule that we're going to talk about is separation of powers. And who came up with this idea? People who did well on the civic COC. So who did? Who is that? Who made separation of powers popular? What Enlightenment thinker? Montesquieu. Yes. Montesquieu. No, you're confusing Thomas Hobbes and Montesquieu. Thomas. Yeah, Thomas Paine was somebody that did Common Sense. All right. So Montesquieu made the idea of separation of powers very, very popular. And the idea of separation. Imagine this. Let's say I created a game, right? Let's call it foosball, right? Foosball, right? I created the game. And then I did what with the game? Every good game needs what? It needs rules, right? So I not only did I create the game, I created the rules. Now, I also am the only one that can enforce the rules. Okay, so I create the game, I create the rules, and I am enforcing the rules. What if you break the rule? What if you don't think you broke the rule, but I say you do? And I'm the one that also tells you whether you broke the rule or not. Yeah, I'm the one that made the rules. I'm enforcing the rules, and I'm the one that if there is a problem or misunderstanding with the rules, I'm the one that tells you whether I'm right or I'm wrong. Is that fair, though?
No, not if it's only you. What if you just didn't like the
Yeah, like I do that all the time. I change the rules as the day go by. Oh, one more rule. I'm sorry, one more rule. I gotta win at the end every time. That's my last rule. I promise you. At the end of the game, I gotta have more points than you. You can't break that rule now. Now, what kind of government is that?
monarchy, absolutely.
It's an absolute government because I created the law. I enforce the law, and I'm also the one to tell you what the law means. That's one person having all the power. That's one person having all the power. So in separation of powers, the constitutional idea is that the branches are divided into three parts. Part 1 is called the legislative branch, and that's found in Article 1. Part 2 is called the what? Article 2 is called what? Executive branch, and that's in Article number 2. And Article number 3 is the judicial branch. So it's one government, but divided into what? Three different parts. 3 different parts. What's the responsibilities of the legislative branch? The power to create new laws. They make laws. So let's make the legislative branch make a law right now. Everybody that walks in the classroom must wear Jordans. That is the law that the legislative branch created. Did the executive branch create that law?
No.
What about the judicial branch?
No.
What's the job of the executive branch with that law? Enforce or carry out or execute the law. Now, if you were the president, how would you execute that law that was made by the legislative branch? How would you make sure people follow it?
With the police forces
Bam. So you would have an FBI agent do what?
make sure they follow it.
How would they make sure?
Keep track.
How would they keep track? Let's make it practical. The rule is Or we can just have someone stand by the door and do what?
Make sure they have.
Make sure you have Jordans on. Bam. So we have one branch that made the law. Is that the same branch that enforces the law? No. Then we got the executive branch that does what with that law? Enforces the law. Executive. And then we have one last branch. Now, if you poor like me, you get nervous, right? I'm like, damn, I ain't got no Jordans. I ain't got no Jordans. So I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to google.com, print out a little Jordan symbol, cut it out, put it on my shoe. And so here comes Mr. Man walking up in Mr. Man's class. And guess what what branch is going to do to me? What branch is going to do what?
The executive branch is gonna get you.
The executive branch is going, the guy that represents the executive branch is going to do what with me? Hey, brother, them ain't no Jordans, yo leaning shoes. Jordan looking like he fell off a building. Just start ranking me, right? So, and now I'm going to say what to that executive person? These are Jordans. What I'm going to say? They got the Jordan symbol on them. You ain't say nothing about it. Hey, they got the Jordan symbol. It's a Jordan. And what is the executive branch going to say to me? No, they're not Jordans because they weren't made by the Jordan brand. So, do we have a disagreement? So the U.S. government is saying, in order for a Jordan to be a Jordan, it has to be made by the Jordan brand. I'm saying, in order for a Jordan to be a Jordan, it has to have the Jordan symbol. Who settles disagreements in this country? We can go to court. We go on to court. And the judicial branch is the one that explains what the law means. So it's going to be Mr. Man versus the United States government. And the judge is going to determine who was right. So this is how all three branches work together. One makes the law. The other one executes the law. And then one says what the law means or what it's supposed to mean. Yes?
So the legislative branch can just make whatever laws they want?
Great question. The question he asked was, can the legislative branch make whatever laws they want? As long as it is under the Constitution. In other words, they can't, like Saeed, you're of a certain religion. What if I said, hey, Saeed, whatever religion you are, I don't care about, you need to say Allah is God.
I'm actually a Muslim, so that's fine.
Okay, alright, so damn. Alright, I'm sorry, class. Saeed always messing up my examples. You need to say Jesus is God, right? And then I said, if you don't say it, I'm gonna give you an F. That is me, a government official, telling you who to worship. What constitutional right am I violating? The First Amendment. And what part of the First Amendment? Freedom of religion. So that's me doing that to you. Now, if let's say the legislative branch made a law, everybody that walks in the class must say, Jesus is Lord. If the legislative branch is that, remember, that says a taco. What's the taco supreme? The Constitution is the taco supreme. So any law that the legislative branch makes can't be higher than the what? Constitution. Can't be higher than the Constitution. It's the taco supreme. You just giving me a taco. Alright? Y'all got this? Sum up this slide in your notes. Alright. Alright. So the word checks and balances, the word check means to limit. The word check means to limit. The word check means to limit. So when we talk about checks and balances, we're talking about how does one branch limit the other. Right? So, first thing we're going to talk about is how does the executive branch check the legislative branch? You have 1 minute, write that down. How does the executive branch check the legislative branch? You don't have to, just copy the question because I'm going to get into detail in the next slide. No, I'm going to answer it in the next slide, so just copy the question. The executive branch limits the legislative branch. Why? Because the president can do what with the legislation? He can veto what Congress does. What's a veto?
Oh, he can pass or stop law.
He can stop it. A veto means refuse to sign. And we all know that in order for a law to become a law, you need what? The president's signature most of the time. Also, another way the executive branch can limit the legislative branch is that the vice president, who works for what branch? You took civics, Saeed. The vice president, who works for the executive branch, does what in the legislative branch? Breaks the tie. There's 100 members of the legislative branch of the Senate. Let's say we have a law and 50 of them say yes, 50 of them say no. Then who breaks that tie? The vice president. So that's how the legislative branch stops the executive branch from being the executive branch stops the legislative branch from being too powerful.
Wait. In my defense, I didn't take civics.
Now we're going to discuss how does the legislative branch check the executive branch. All right. This is how Congress limits the president. What's one way? The legislative branch can do what with a presidential veto? I can override and say, you know what, President? We don't care about what you just did. We're going to override it. How do I override it? By 2/3 of Congress. If 2/3 of people in Congress say it's an override, then it's going to be override. It's going to become a law anyway. How else does the legislative branch limit the executive branch? How else does the legislative branch limit the executive branch? Yes. So although the president nominates, who does the president rely on for that person to get the job? The Senate. So the Senate has to approve any presidential nomination. So that's one way it limits the powers. Because how would unlimited powers look? If I get to nominate and they get to choose, and I get to choose. So that's not limiting me. So the way that they limit me is by having me, the president, nominate, and then the Senate approves. Think of it like this. I think I told you guys this. Let's say this pencil in my hand is a cookies and cream Hershey, right? Hopefully I don't embarrass myself. Hopefully I'm. Oh. All right. So what we do in my house is I say to my brother, you break, I choose. What does that mean? You're going to break the piece of food in whatever part, and I'm going to be the one to choose which one I want to eat. Now, think about this for a second. If you break it evenly, does it matter which one I choose? But if you make one part bigger than the other, then guess what? I'm going to have the power to do what? Choose the bigger part. So think of this as a way of keeping everything balanced. So that it doesn't make sense for you to try to break one part bigger than the other, because why? If I have the power to choose, I'm going to choose the bigger part. So you might as well make everything what? Even. Everything the same. That's checks and balances. All right? Wonderful, guys. You guys are doing a wonderful job. Only Congress can declare war. Only Congress can declare war. The president can have people go to other countries, but only Congress can declare war. This is how the legislative branch can check the president. Yes, Saeed.
Why did they make it like that?
Because they don't want one branch being too powerful.
Doesn't that make the Congress too powerful if they can just declare war?
They have a little bit more power than the other, but there are some ways that they are checked as well. And we're going to talk about that. Congress is the only one that can approve paying for actions that the president wants. Like, for instance, let me put it this way. Let's say Genesis wants to build a wall, right? Let's say Genesis wants to build a wall. It's up to Congress, but is Genesis going to be the one actually buying the bricks and building it? No, she needs money. Who gives Genesis the money to do that? Congress. So if Genesis don't got the money, is that wall going up? So that's another way Congress can check the president. Why did they want to check the president so much?
Because then it'd be like an absolute monarchy.
Yeah, they didn't want one person having this much power. So they created a lot of ways to be checked. It's kind of like when I was getting slick with my mom. She said, "Come here, Dex. You talking back." She hit me in the chest real quick. She said, "Check yourself before you wreck yourself." Fool. Now what that means is you better limit the way you talking to me before I destroy you. Same thing. They need to check themselves. They don't need to do too much because they gon' get defeated anyway. Go ahead.
But what happens if I'm able to like support my own self? Like, what if I want to build a
Oh, like Donald Trump, big time billionaire.
Yeah, like,
It's still. I mean, if you building your first of all, that's gonna be a lot of money. And if he want to do that just to keep some immigrants out, bruh, all power to you, man. Build your own joint. But remember, it's still government land anyway, and you can't just build things wherever you feel like.
If you bought the land first.
oh yeah.
Huh? Oh, if it's your land, which it's not, but if it's your land, do what you want on it. It's
Can
cool.
you buy any land you wanted? Like,
Not necessarily. You got it's an approval process.
That's like a border.
All right. Another way is if the president do something illegal, the president can get impeached by who? The legislative branch. That means impeach means to be removed from office. So there are two steps to the impeachment. First step, you need to get impeached. The second step you need to get convicted of a crime.
By the House of Representatives.
The first step is done by the House of Representatives. They impeach you. They determine whether you should be impeached. You should be removed from office. That's called impeachment. The second step is the Senate determining whether you are guilty or not guilty. And if they find you guilty, then you're going to get removed from office.
I have a question.
Yes,
How come the Congress can limit the president so much?
because remember, good question. When they were creating a new government, they didn't want another monarchy with one person. So they created a Congress, and Congress was actually created before the president, and that's probably why it's Article 1, because it's the most important. They wanted to make sure that was good, because they didn't want one person leading them ever again. Okay? And only the Senate can approve treaty. These are all ways the legislative branch can check the executive branch. Now y'all seen how much ways the executive branch can check the legislative branch. It ain't that much. I veto. That's kind of it. I veto this thing called a bill. And that's it. There's about 6 different ways. 6 different ways we can check you, bro. Hit you in the chest real quick, Prez. That's why you shouldn't be so scared of the president. Because if the legislative branch don't allow a lot of things, it can't get done. So we discussed how the executive branch limits the legislative branch. We discussed how the legislative branch can limit the executive branch. Let's discuss how the legislative branch can check the judicial branch. Everybody done forgot about the judicial branch. It's like little brother. I'm hungry, Ma. Oh, I forgot to feed you. All right. Flashback. All right, now. Congress limits the Supreme Court because guess what? Congress can add an amendment to the Constitution. So if they add an amendment, they're adding to the supreme law of the land. So now you can't say it's unconstitutional. Because why? It's a part of the Constitution through an amendment. That's the way Congress or the legislative branch can limit the Supreme Court or the judicial branch. Congress, big time. I mean, legislative branch, big time, bro. It's like the guy with all the girls on campus. Hey, all these checks. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
So they could like say no freedom of speech.
Yeah, if they do now you know that the amendment process is very difficult to do. If they do a whole amendment process that limits your freedom of speech, technically it is a part of the Constitution now. It's an amendment. Yeah.
Are you able to change, like, to change amendments?
You can repeal amendments, yes, and yeah, you can take them out, but it's the same process to do that as well. It's very difficult to do.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, is there anything that you can't do that to, like take away a law? Because, like, for example, like the First Amendment or something. So, if enough people wanted, they could just take that.
I don't even want your mind to go there because it's so damn hard to do, honestly. It probably won't ever even happen because I mean, who's gonna what congressman is gonna say, I want everybody's First Amendment right to be gone. Who's with me? And then you just kind of like sitting there all alone. Like, no, we don't want to do that because we kind of like freedom of speech. We like these things. All right. Congress can also determine how much federal courts there are. Congress can also determine how much federal courts there are. That's a way Congress limits them. All right, so here we go. We're almost there. We're almost there. How does the judicial branch check the legislative branch and the executive branch? All right. The Supreme Court limits the president and Congress how? The judicial branch can declare acts of Congress what? Unconstitutional. They can say that is not supported by the Constitution. If you ever want to know what unconstitutional means, just break down the word. On means what? Not. Constitution is the Constitution. So not in the Constitution. Not constitutional. And if they declare an act of Congress unconstitutional, and that means it's not supported by the Constitution, then that means Congress did something what? Wrong. Illegal. All right? That's how they check Congress. Hey, Congress, you made a law, but that law wasn't right because it doesn't support. It's not supported by the Constitution.
How come the judicial branch has
Judicial?
So little,
Yeah.
The judicial branch has like so little ways to check the other, like just that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Remember, they didn't. They just created the judicial branch. It wasn't the Congress has been around for a minute. The executive branch and the judicial branch they had to create when they created the new Constitution. But they really wanted Congress to have a lot of power, but not all of it. So that's why they separated powers. What's the difference between checks and balances and separation of powers? Yeah.
Checks is limiting.
Mm-hmm.
Separating powers is creating different.
Yes, good. So checks and balances talks about what each branch can and what each branch can't do. Separation of powers tells me what they can do. You see what I'm saying? So if I'm talking about separation of powers, I'm saying that legislative branch can make laws. Executive branch can enforce laws. Judicial branch can interpret what the law means. But if I'm talking about checks and balances, I'm getting specific as to how one branch limits the others. Separation of powers don't necessarily talk about how one branch limit another branch. It just tells me what each branch can do. The judicial branch can declare what?
Presidential actions.
Bam. That's the only card. Hey, that's not constitutional either. You can't do that. And last but not least, and very important, is judicial review. Judicial review. What does judicial mean? Hold on. What does judicial mean?
Law.
Like something regarding judges, right? And then review means look, what?
Review, like looking over something.
Look again. So judicial review allows the Supreme Court to review actions taken by the judicial branch and the executive branch and determine it unconstitutional. And judicial review came about with the court case Madison versus Marbury, or Marbury versus Madison. I'm sorry. Sum up this slide in your notes. Yeah. Oh, yes, go ahead.
It seems if the constitutional principles of checks and balances and separation of powers are similar, how can I tell the difference?
Bam. The question is what I just asked you. All right. Alyssa said it seems as if separation of powers and checks and balances are pretty similar. How can I tell the difference? What's the answer, guys?
Separation
Separation of powers focuses on
responsibilities of the branch.
the responsibilities of the branch. What are you responsible for? Each branch. Checks and balances focuses on the what? Limitations of one branch on another. So let me say that one more time. Separation of powers focuses on each branch's responsibilities. You make laws. You enforce laws. You interpret law. Checks and balances focuses on how one branch limits another branch. Yes.
I just want to say the sentence before was really bad. I had two ands in one sentence. That's not good. Should really fix that.
Class, ignore Saeed, please. He's being a jerk right now. All right. Does the action of this branch limit any other? That's the question you want to ask yourself. When you are determining whether it's separation of powers or checks and balances, you're going to read it and say, does this action of the branch limit another branch? If the answer is yes, then they are describing an example of what? Checks and balances. If the answer to this question is no, then the action described is an example of separation of powers. And that's the end of the presentation. Really, not yet. Now, guys, I want you to answer these questions. How does the constitutional principle of separation of powers limit the government? How does the constitutional principle of checks and balances limit